Hey guys, welcome to Telling the Told and Untold. My name is Tshego. Before we go straight into today's case, I do have to give you guys a content warning. In this video, we do talk about assault. I don't go into too much detail, but still, if that's not something you think you're interested in watching, then this video probably isn't for you. So maybe you guys can watch some of my other videos or just wait for my next upload. Hannah Cornelius was born on the 13th of February 1996 in Cape Town to parents Anna and Willem. Her mother was a lawyer and her father a magistrate. She also had one younger brother. His name was Andries, and unfortunately he was born with autism. It's said that Hannah was very loving and caring, especially for the people around her, and she was extremely close to her grandmother. The two of them had such a special bond. When Hannah was 16, her parents asked her what she wanted to do to celebrate her birthday, and Hannah told them that she just didn't want anything big or extravagant. She didn't want her parents spending so much money on her and her birthday, and instead they created gift bags, and she decided to give them to the children in the nearby informal Red Hill settlement. And I think that this just speaks to the type of person Hannah was: so loving, caring, and selfless. Hannah attended Redmond House, which is a private school. She also played the piano. She loved drama, and she did exceptionally well in school and matriculated with 6 distinctions. And she would also spend some of her time volunteering at an animal rescue shelter. When Hannah was 18 years old, her parents wanted to buy her a car because they were well off, they could afford it. But Hannah said no, and she said she'd rather have her grandmother's 1984 Blue City Golf. Her grandmother was in her late 80s at this time, and she wasn't driving it, so it just made sense for Hannah, and that's what she did. She took her grandmother's Blue City Golf. Hannah went to Stellenbosch University for a BA degree, which is in humanities, and she majored in languages, philosophy, and literature. Her family were a bit disappointed that she didn't want to do anything in law, because obviously, like, her mother was a lawyer, her father was a magistrate, so they thought that she would take the law path. But Hannah was very insistent that she didn't want to do that. She wanted to focus like on her BA degree. She was happy with her decision, and they were proud of her for that, for like just going after what she wants. And yeah. On the 26th of May 2017, Hannah was out with a couple of her friends, and one of these friends, his name was Cheslin Marsh. Cheslin lived about 10 kilometers away from where the group was, and at around 3 a.m. he told the group that he was ready to go home and just call it a night. And Hannah just asked him like if he's sure that he wanted to go home at that time, that it was pretty dangerous. And all Cheslin said to her was that, yes, I'm going to drive my longboard. I've always been protected by God, so why must I be afraid now? And basically, a longboard is just a skateboard, and that was his mode of transport. So Hannah just like asked if she could take him home instead, and Cheslin was just like saying no, that it's okay, like you don't have to take me home. But Hannah was very insistent that like she take him home, and eventually Cheslin just said okay. And he remembers like just thinking like, why are you so nice to me, you know, like you don't have to drive me home. And then Hannah just gave an ultimatum. It's either I take you home, or you're gonna go home on your longboard and I'll follow behind you in my car just to make sure that you get home safe. And literally, that's just the type of person that she was, like just so kind and caring, wanting to make sure that he gets home safe, you know, just knowing how dangerous it is out there, the time of night it's just, yeah. At 3:23, CCTV footage from a shop shows Hannah's car pulling into an open space near Battery Center on Bird Street, and the area is adjacent to an open piece of land. Shortly after they arrive, 4 men are seen on the CCTV footage, like walking towards where the camera is, and you can kind of see them observing the Blue City Golf that Hannah and Cheslin are in, but like just observing it but not really doing anything. And after a couple of minutes, they're right in front of the CCTV camera, and then they go out of sight. It would later be discovered that these 4 men were on their way to a block of flats, and they had basically just planned to rob someone on their way to like their destination, just just like a short lift on their way there. Hannah and Cheslin were in the car chatting, and at this point Hannah had switched off the car, and about 10 minutes into their conversation they decided to say their goodbyes, and as Cheslin was trying to get out of the car, he was stopped. 2 of the 4 men that we had seen in the CCTV footage had approached the car, and there was one guy by the driver's side. He had managed to put his hand in and he was holding a screwdriver towards Hannah's chest, and just instinctively Cheslin reached out to try and grab the screwdriver out of this guy's hand when someone came by his passenger side window and pointed a knife at him and basically just said to him like, let go or we're going to kill this girl, in Afrikaans. The 2 men who approached the car were Geraldo Parsons as well as Vernon Witbooi. 2 other men then approached the car. One of them was Nashville Julius and the other one Ibn Fanikark. They went to the back of the car and then they took Cheslin out of the passenger seat, put him in the back of the car in between these 2 men, and Hannah was left in the front of the car and she was in between the 2 other men. And then the men started looking for the car keys, but what they didn't know was that as soon as like everything started happening, Hannah had decided to hide the car keys. And these men were searching for the car keys, and after a while they began threatening her, and this is when she decided to give up the car keys. And the reason why she had hid the car keys at first was because she didn't want them to take her grandmother's car. Like she told them, like she pleaded with them, like take anything you want, phones, money, but please just don't take my grandmother's car. But after they threatened her, it was like there's no use, and then she just decided to give up the car keys. And after she had given up the car keys, one of the men, Nashville Julius, he decided to just leave. He didn't want to be a part of anything that was going to happen afterwards, and he had managed to take Cheslin's cell phone as well as 40 rand before he left. At 3:39, the car pulls away with Hannah, Cheslin, and 3 of the perpetrators inside. And the men were basically driving to Kraaifontein to look for drugs. But on their way there, they had stopped the car, taken Cheslin out of the back seat and put him in the boot. And then Hannah was put in the passenger seat. The car is then seen at a Caltex garage, and Vernon is seen inside at an ATM trying to withdraw money with Cheslin's bank card. However, Cheslin had given him the incorrect PIN, so he wasn't able to withdraw money, and unfortunately Cheslin would face the consequences of this. Once back in the car, it said that Hannah was just facing forward. She was just very quiet, not saying anything. And the men had told her that they just wanted to do a couple of things and just get home, and then they would give her the car back. So just basically trying to calm her down, make sure she's not worried, just relax, you're gonna get your car after we get home. At around 5 a.m. they finally get to the drug merchant's house in Kraaifontein, and one of the men get out of the car and go inside the house. Not too long after that, he comes back outside and he tells the other 2 men that all of them have to go inside the house. And this is when they just started asking each other what they were going to do with Hannah, because obviously they couldn't leave her alone in the car because she would be left in the passenger seat and Cheslin is still in the boot at this time. So if all 3 of the men left her there, there was a high chance that she would try and escape with Cheslin. So this is when they decided that they would take Hannah inside the house with them. So all 4 of them got out the car and went into the house, and this is when Cheslin tries to get out of the boot. He's kicking, he's trying everything he can to try and get out of this boot and try and escape, but unfortunately he just couldn't get the boot open. And eventually all 4 of them came back, and you heard them walking towards the car, and you just noticed how silent they were. But as soon as they got into the car, they just started speaking and asking each other what they were going to do. And this is when Hannah started speaking, and she just started asking them where are we going, why are you doing this, what are your plans, just trying to understand why they had kidnapped them and just what were they going to do with them. Between 5:30 and 6 a.m., the car pulled over in a large piece of land near sewage works in Kraaifontein. As soon as the car stopped, Hannah asked the men like what they were doing, and they just said no, they were just stopping for a smoke break. After this, two men opened the boot and took Cheslin out. And one of them said to him, like, you gave me the wrong pin. Why did she do that? And then they pulled him into the bushes and basically made him lie down on the ground. And they told him to put his head on a rock. And as soon as this happened, Cheslin remembers him just like praying. And he just asked God for forgiveness for everything that he had done in this life, because he knew that he was about to go to the next life. And he just remembers just not being ready to leave this life. He then said amen, and everything went black. After the three men got back inside the car, Hannah just started pleading with them, and she just asked them like, please let me go, like you can do anything you want, but like please just let me go afterwards. The three men then drove to a remote paintball field on Bottle Ray Road, where they took Hannah out of the car and repeatedly raped her. Afterwards, they put her back into the car, but instead of putting her in the passenger seat, they put her into the boot. The men then drove into a vineyard area and stopped at a vineyard called Groenhof Farm. And once they stopped the car, they opened the boot to try and get Hannah out, but Hannah just refused. She didn't want to get out of the boot, and they began pulling her, but Hannah was so adamant on not getting out of the boot, like her hands were on the side and they were pulling her. And this is when she was stabbed in the neck with a screwdriver 2 times. They then got Hannah out of the boot, and they saw a very big and heavy rock. This rock weighed about 37.5 kilograms. They picked up the rock and dropped it on Hannah's head 2 times. This rock caused severe blunt head injury, so severe that it caused the skull base to fracture with tearing of the brain, pons, and mid-brain. This rock was so heavy and the blunt force so severe that Hannah died almost immediately. It was fatal. The men then decided to drive back to Kraaifontein, but what they don't know is that as they're driving back to Kraaifontein, Cheslin regains consciousness. And immediately, as soon as he wakes up, he runs to the nearest house that he could find. He climbs over the wall and he finds a couple. But the couple just didn't want to help him, because mind you, at this time, like, Cheslin is covered in blood, like his one side is full of blood, and they thought that maybe he had been a part of like a gang fight, because the area that Cheslin was left in and the area that this couple lived in was known for like gang violence and gang fights, so they just didn't want to be a part of it. But fortunately, as this was happening, a police car was driving past, and the couple flagged down the police car and told them about Cheslin. Cheslin was immediately taken to Kraaifontein Community Hospital, thereafter taken to Tygerberg Hospital. He had open wounds on his head as well as a fractured arm, and the doctors say that he was lucky to have survived. During all of this, he was telling the police officers about what had happened to him and just like begging them to find Hannah and to find the Blue City Golf that she was in with these 3 other men. And immediately an APB was put out for the Blue City Golf. Then at 8:30 that morning, Hannah Cornelius's body was found. The 3 men are still in the city golf when they try and kidnap another woman, but fortunately she managed to escape. But they did manage to steal her cell phone as well as her handbag. And then after this, the 3 men are unaccounted for a couple of hours until about 1 p.m. when they resurface. The 3 men had kidnapped another woman, and her name was Mimi October. She was walking from a shopping center when they picked her up and just placed her into the car. And then at around 12 minutes after 1, so 13:12, the men pull up to a Shell garage and they go inside to an ATM, and it's Vern Boy who's inside trying to withdraw money using Mimi's bank card. And then after a couple of minutes, one of the other men join him, and you can see the 2 men on CCTV footage, and they managed to withdraw 3,900 rand from Mimi's account. They then go back into the car and they dropped her off, and they literally dropped her off a few kilometers away from where Hannah's body had been discovered just a couple of hours before. But before they dropped her off, they managed to steal 2 of her cell phones as well as her wedding rings. After dropping off Mimi, the men then dropped off Van Kerk in Stellenbosch and gave him 1,000 rand for his participation in the crimes. Then it is Vernboy and Parsons who are left, and they decide that they want to drive down to Delft, but through Stellenbosch. And as they're driving through Stellenbosch, there is an undercover police officer, Constable Bulelani Siko, who notices the blue City Golf, and obviously there had been an APB put out for this car, so he knew exactly what it was involved in, and immediately he starts following this car. And the 2 men that are in the car, that like the blue City Golf, they notice this car following them. So just trying to make sure like it's not actually following them, they just start making like random turns, but then they notice that it is following them, and then a high speed ensues and other police officers join in. Then the blue City Golf drives into a farm, and as it's driving into the farm, Constable Bulelani gets out of his car and starts chasing the City Golf on foot. And fortunately, the City Golf stopped right in front of a fence that had a security guard. So the 2 men were basically just stuck, so they got out of the car and just started running on foot, and they hid in like the farm, like different areas, but the farm workers saw the police officers and just notified them where the 2 men were hiding, and this is how the 2 men were apprehended. And not too long after that, Van Kerk and Julius were also arrested. So it turned out that these 4 men all knew each other. Witboy and Van Kerk were good friends and lived close to each other in Cladesville. Parsons grew up in Kraaifontein. However, he spent a lot of time in Cladesville because that's where his girlfriend lived. And apparently there was a 5th guy. However, this 5th guy has never been found or arrested. So the 2 women that had faced the 3 men after Hannah had been killed, the one who had been robbed and Mimu who had been kidnapped, they said that there was another man with the 3 men, and they all said that this man was like darker in complexion, but police officers were never able to find him, even though they did have like DNA evidence that identified a 5th perpetrator. But I'm assuming like his DNA isn't on the system or anything because they were never able to identify him. So that kind of just fell through. Okay, so let me tell you about these 4 men. First, it's Vernon Witboy. Vernon grew up in Cape Town, and he went to like a traditional school until grade 11. And then afterwards, he started working for his uncle selling fruits and vegetables. But this changed when he was sent to live with his aunt just before like his early teenage years. And this is just because his mom worked long hours and couldn't look after him. So she just thought it would be better for him to move in with his aunt, who would be better equipped to like look after him and give him like everything that he needs. During this time, he completed his education until grade 12 at a youth center, and Vernon had a long criminal record. He had 16 criminal charges that included housebreaking, theft, possession of drugs, as well as escaping custody. And he had been in and out of jail between 1997 to 2016. And sometimes like he wouldn't even be sentenced and go inside like prison. Like they'd give him like a slap on the wrist, and there was one time where he literally got 100 rand fine. 100 rand fine, and was just like sent on his merry way. Vernon had 2 children, and at the time of the crimes, he was 32 years old, and his sons were 5 and 6 years old respectively. Vernon was also part of He was also a member of the Numbers gang, specifically the 28th, and he was ranked as a colonel. Geraldo Parsons, on the other hand, was one of 3 kids. His father was a bus driver who unfortunately passed away when he was young, and he went to school up until grade 9 before dropping out. And during his schooling life, this is where he was introduced to gangsterism, which eventually led to him joining a gang. He had 3 children who were 6, 8, and 12, and at the time of the crime, he was 28 years old. During this time, he did have an actual job. He worked on a farm and would earn about 700 Rand a week. However, most of his income came from the crimes that he would do on the side, you know. He was also part of the number gang, specifically the 28th, and he was ranked as a sergeant. And he also had a criminal record that included housebreaking, theft, and possession of stolen goods. Eden van der Kerk was the oldest of 6 children, and he still lived with his parents. Both of his parents were alcoholics, and he only completed his schooling until grade 5. And by the age of 13, he was already addicted to drugs. In 2013, he was convicted for robbery with aggravating circumstances, and he was nicknamed Cess, and this is because he too was part of the Numbers gang, specifically the 26ers, and at the time of the crimes, he was 29 years old. Then the last guy is Nashville Julius, the one who had decided that he didn't want to participate further in the crimes when the car was still parked in that open lot, and had left with Cheslin's phone and 40 Rand. So Nashville had a younger sister, and growing up, he wasn't like the other guys. He grew up completely different. He had a very stable home, had both of his parents. Growing up, it said he was very quiet, and he also used to stutter, but eventually he did grow out of that. He completed his schooling until grade 11, but after he left school, this is where he started hanging out with the wrong crowd and started using drugs, and also just started his crime life. He had 7 convictions, and it included theft, possession of drugs, as well as housebreaking. Eventually, the trial against all 4 men started, and all 4 of them pleaded not guilty. One of the reasons why they said they were not guilty is because at the time of the crime, yes, 2 of them were under the influence of drugs. So their defense was basically that they were under the influence of drugs and they didn't know what they were doing. But this was proven not to be true, because even though they were under the influence of drugs, they made sure that they tried to not get caught. So when they would go into the garage, they would try and avoid the cameras so you wouldn't see their faces. When they sexually assaulted Hannah, they used condoms so that their DNA evidence wouldn't be found. Witboy changed his pants, whereas Van der Kerk burned his pants so that there was no evidence. So it's yes, you were under the influence of drugs, however, you still knew what you were doing was wrong, which is why you tried to make sure there was no evidence against you, you know? Nashville Julius was charged with robbery and kidnapping, and the other 3 men were charged with murder, rape, attempted murder, kidnapping, and robbery, and all 4 men were found guilty of all of their charges. So I'm going to read you all of their charges because there's so many. For robbery with aggravating circumstances of Cheslin Marsh, all 4 men were found guilty. For robbery with aggravating circumstances of Hannah Cornelius, all 4 men were found guilty. The kidnapping of Cheslin Marsh, all 4 men were found guilty. The kidnapping of Hannah Cornelius, all 4 men were found guilty. Then for the attempted murder of Cheslin Marsh, the rape of Hannah Cornelius, the murder of Hannah Cornelius, the robbery with aggravating circumstances against the woman that they had robbed, the robbery with aggravating circumstances of Mimi October, as well as the kidnapping of Mimi October, all 3 men, which were Vernon Witboy, Geraldo Parsons, and Eben van der Kerk, were found guilty. In total, Vernon Witboy and Geraldo Parsons were sentenced to 150 15 years each with 2 life sentences. Ibn Fanikark was sentenced to 128 years and 2 life sentences, and Nashville Julius was sentenced to 22 years in prison for kidnapping and robbery of Hannah Cornelius and Cheslin Marsh. But after 25 years, actually only after 25 years, Vernon Woodboy, Geraldo Parsons, and Ibn Fanikark will be eligible for parole. So where is Cheslin now? After the incident, he lost hearing in one of his ears, and he has to use a hearing aid for the rest of his life. In 2020, he did go back to school, and he was engaged and had a son with his fiance. Unfortunately, after Hannah's death, her mother was just never the same, and just 10 months later, on the 25th of March 2018, Hannah's mother went swimming in the Atlantic Ocean, which is nothing unusual, but unfortunately on this day she never returned. Her death was ruled as an accident, and her husband says that he believes it was not suicide, but he does say that if she went into the ocean and she started struggling because of the tides and the currents, he does believe that she wouldn't have fought hard to try and get back to land. Like, she just would have been okay with what was happening because like she was in so much pain, so she just wouldn't have tried really. The Hannah Cornelius Foundation was set up by her mother before her untimely death, and this foundation raises money for community centers and NGOs which help children in need. Hannah's family reiterates the death that Hannah was no more special than any other victims of crime, and say that it is unfair that her case received so much attention when there are women and children in South Africa that get raped and murdered on a daily basis. She was no more special than any other victim. It's just that hers received so much attention when other cases don't even receive half of that. There is a documentary on Showmax about this case, and it's titled Last Blue Ride, the Hannah Cornelius story, so you guys can go watch it to go see CCTV footage of the night, like actual CCTV footage, as well as more pictures of Hannah and her family, as well as seeing Cheslin speak about what he went through, what he's doing now. And they also delved deeper into the Numbers gang, because most 3 of the guys were part of the Numbers gang. So if that's something that you're interested in, you guys can go check it out on Showmax. I'll link it in the description box below. This video is not sponsored. It's not sponsored. It's just, you know. But yeah, that's it for today's case. If you guys have any comments, please leave them down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.